everybody. I am Cassidy. I'm the HippieCatholic. Welcome to my channel. If you're new here, please subscribe to be part of the conversation. I am here with a special guest today, and her name is Regina Lux, and she is a Goth Catholic mommy, and she runs a channel and blog called Veritas on the Rocks. Regina is also a member of the Secular Carmelite Order, and we're going to be talking all about that order today. Tell us a bit about yourself, Regina.
Hi. Well, thank you so much for having me on. I'm a total fangirl of yours, so this is very exciting for me. Well, I joined the Carmelite Order officially at 18. I began studying at 15, and that's a requirement to make your first promise. You have about 3 years of study within a Carmelite community. So it's officially been over half my life that I've been drenched in Carmelite spirituality, and it's one of my big passions. But it's funny because I very rarely actually speak about my spirituality. I'm actually very, very clandestine when it comes to my spirituality and any kind of intimacy with God. And it's difficult for me to open up about it for a few reasons. I feel like people really abuse spirituality and use it as an excuse to kind of have authority over other people, if you will. And then I'm also afraid that if I'm so open, I come off as unbelievable because I have a very, very off-the-wall story. It's one of those things that makes me really excited for all of us to die so that we can all fully know each other. And I could finally be open about my spirituality with everybody I'm in heaven with, you know? Mm-hmm. But until then, I'm still pretty secretive about it. And I'll probably reveal more in this video than I probably have ever. I tend to avoid conversations like this because I find people kind of abuse this as a way to gain authority. And that's really the last thing I want anyone to get an impression from me about, you know, because I'm not perfect. And I'm sure I'm going to say things that other people are going to have to correct me in this interview about history and all that. And people should feel free to do that. I definitely don't want to come off as all-knowing or anything like that. I want to express how wonderful Carmelite spirituality is in an inviting way, to really invite people into contemplative prayer, because that's where God calls us. So hopefully I'm just the right amount of raw in this video and I don't get too emotional or anything like that. And the other reason is that spiritual intimacy with God is so intense and so intimate. People really don't, it's very difficult for someone to comprehend it if they haven't experienced it. So it's, you know, it's so intimate, and reception of the Eucharist is the only thing that's really comparable, because it's more intimate than marital union, you know? Yeah. So going into a conversation about that, it makes me a little nervous, but hopefully I can kind of get over that a little bit to help people into this conversation.
I definitely strive to create a safe space on the HippieCatholic to talk about like all sorts of stuff. And like one of those things that I really am passionate about is like, you know, vulnerability and like opening, you know, up about your true self. And because ultimately we all have a hunger for God. God chose to die on the cross for us in the most vulnerable way possible. You know, like God did not have to do that, but God chose to do that. Thank you so much. Like, I feel like this is so sacred. Could you tell us a bit about the history of the Carmelite order? Like just kind of like a crash course version, you know, of like the Carmelites.
Of course, anyone can stop this video at any time and do further research. So I'll just kind of go over the gist of it. I had to take notes so I wouldn't get too nervous and forget everything. So the Carmelite order has its roots in the first Hermits of Mount Carmel. Now, we consider the father of Carmelite spirituality to be Elijah. And that is based on the verse from Kings. And I'll go ahead and read that. Kings 1:19. The Lord said, "Go out and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, and the Lord is about to pass by." Then a great and powerful wind tore the mountains apart, and shattered the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind, there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake came a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire came a gentle whisper. When Elijah heard it, he pulled his cloak over his face and went out and stood at the mouth of the cave. Then a voice said to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" And he replied, "I have been very zealous for the Lord God Almighty. The Israelites have rejected your covenant, tore down your altars, and put your prophet to death with the sword. I am the only one left, and now they are trying to kill me too." So this is very powerful. This verse is so powerful to the Carmelite order, because you have God approaching us, not in all the crazy things, not in the fire, not in the earthquake, but seeking to approach us in the small whisper, which breathes of contemplation, contemplative prayer. It also has to do with the Crusades. So Elijah was basically the Rambo of the Old Testament. And I actually did not know the correlation with the Carmelites and the Crusades until recently, which shocks me. I'm like, how did I not know about this? But one of my things is the Crusades. It's one of my bits.
Yeah.
And encouraging people to be crusaders of this time and what it means to be a crusader. And it's just so funny because I always sort of felt like an enigma when it came to that. And then seeing like, oh no, it's like this is orchestrated by God. And the seal of the special Carmelite crest has a line from Kings: "With zeal have I been zealous for the Lord God of hosts." And that is also from that same reading. So it's so beautiful how things just come together. And I feel a little bit less of an enigma because of it. The religious Carmelite order was reformed by St. Teresa of Avila. So the Carmelite order existed before the Discalced Carmelite order came into being. And there were the reformers. The main reformers were St. Teresa of Avila and St. John of the Cross, and they were buddies. And they formed the Discalced Carmelite order, the religious one. And discalced simply means shoeless. That basically signified a more austere lifestyle, because at the time, there's always been corruption in the church. Their stories are incredible about what they faced. And I'll send you links for their books that you can put in the description, because I just think everyone should read it. What they went through to fight for other people's souls, to fight for authentic contemplative prayer and authentic religious life of poverty, chastity, and obedience. It's amazing. Even the people that they had to fight in the church. And it's so inspiring. And I think about them, and whatever I face is just downhill compared to that. And you have these giants of the church. Like, we stand on the shoulders of giants in our church. They refounded the order. Now, the old Carmelite order still exists. The Discalced Carmelite order is different. And then, of course, there's the Secular Carmelite order, which lay people, so non-religious, can be part of. Obviously, I'm a mother, so I'm not a nun. The shorthand for that is OCDS, which I can say it when I'm not nervous, but I'm afraid of, botching it up. So I'll just put it right here. This is what it means. It's based on the Rule of St. Albert, which, once again, you can pause the video and go look up what the Rule of St. Albert is. So all this history can be looked up. I don't want to spend too much time on it because people can just pause the video and look up on their own. I really want to focus more on Carmelite spirituality and what it means to be a secular Carmelite, because I truly believe everybody is called to a deep spirituality. There's different kinds of spirituality. Not everyone's called to Carmelite spirituality. Certainly we have in the church such amazing flavors. We have lots of different orders and different charisms. But the Carmelites' charism is contemplative prayer. So I'm excited to go more into contemplative prayer and what that means.
That's beautiful. And I felt like the need to reach out to you because I kept like seeing things about the Carmelites everywhere. Like all of like my favorite saints are, most of them are Carmelites. Like Saint Teresa of Lisieux, she's one of my favorites. And then also Edith Stein is one of my favorites too. And like Edith Stein is, she's such an amazing Catholic woman, like especially for like, you know, like empowering women and stuff. Like Edith Stein's like amazing. And like I don't know, I just kept getting like these little like God winks, I call them, of just like Carmelite everywhere. And then like you popped up and then I was like, okay, you know what, I'll take the hint, I'll reach out. So then now here we are. It's just kind of funny, you know. It's like I felt like I was getting like added, you know, like added like on Twitter, like but except like it was just from like the world, just like little things kept popping up. It was so funny. But yeah, like thank you so much for sharing that about the Carmelite order. Something about it just seems so compelling because I love the way that it really seeks to magnify the everyday experience and magnify the beauty and miraculousness of the everyday experience. And I feel like that people need that, especially today, because sometimes I think that we go through life feeling like life is all mundane when really like all life is a miracle. Like existence is a miracle, and like I always have to remind myself of that. And I think that the Carmelite spirituality is a good way to remind ourselves of that.
Maybe we should back up and kind of explain a little bit better what contemplative prayer is, because it's a lot of people don't really understand what it is. So let's back way up. There's 3 different kinds of prayer. There's the vocal, there's meditative, and then there's contemplative. So vocal, that's usually us, right? We're the ones speaking out loud, Hail Mary, or whatever other prayers. And then there's meditative. It's like Mysteries of the Rosary, meditative. But contemplative prayer is different because anyone can, you know, have vocal prayer, meditative prayer. Contemplative prayer is more the step up, where it's a type of prayer that unifies your soul with God. And the thing is that God is really the one doing 95% of the work for it. Contemplative prayer is something where the best we can do is show up and say, okay, God, here I am. I'm available for you. And it takes practice in order to get to the level where you can truly focus on God. And it's difficult to achieve contemplative prayer. It really is. But at the same time, we cannot achieve it. We can only do so much because God is really doing most of the work. So he pulls us up in prayer. And then there's, you know, when you actually start experiencing contemplative prayer, sometimes it might hit you and God might just be like, hey, come here a second.
Right.
It's like, now that we're in the inn, I got something to tell you. And those are usually called locutions, but I could go into that. But people think that contemplative prayer is so unattainable, that it's only for the holiest of people. The thing is, God creates all of us for this kind of union with him. And that's why I believe there's mysticism in every religion, because that's the truth. The core truth of humanity is that God creates every single person for him, for union with him. That's in the CCC first page. And so no matter what religion you are, there's always, you know, mysticism, union with God in that religion. Now, of course, God calls everyone to the fullness of the Catholic faith, where he can give himself Eucharistically to his people. But he's also going to meet people where they're at. The best way to do that is through, you know, the hole in their being that's only shaped for him. So Saint Teresa of Avila, in her work, The Interior Castle, writes about how, an allegory about how our soul is a castle, more or less. And the throne room is where God is, in the very center. And it's a magnificent work. Everyone should read it. But she talks about progressing further and further into the castle, the throne room where God is, by growing in virtue. And it's impossible to have that kind of relationship with God without seeking to grow in virtue. And that's really where my line of ministry comes in, because I want nothing more than to encourage people to grow in that sort of virtue that makes them accessible to God. Because the more we cling to our sins, our mortal sins, our venial sins, the higher the gate is to get into your interior castle, if that makes sense. The more we grow in desire for God, and that's what we do on our part for contemplative prayer. We set ourselves up to be open to the calling of God by giving our time, by setting aside 30 minutes at least a day for contemplative prayer, and by growing in virtue so that we can progress to the throne room of our soul and have that union with God, which is so extremely intimate. One of the things about it is you might be, a couple rooms outside the throne room one day and then be back on the outside of the walls another day. It's never one of those things where it's like, okay, I made it to the throne room. Okay, I'm good. I can do whatever I want. It is a relationship that you have to upkeep. Mm-hmm. And you need to dedicate that time and that desire for God. But when you achieve contemplative prayer, it changes you. That was your question, right? How does it change you?
Yes.
It changes you on such a significant, profound level. My thing, like I said, I'm a little bit of an enigma. I'm terrified of people. I have major social anxiety. I don't like being in front of cameras, but I do this anyway because I have a deep affection for other people's souls. And I have that deep affection because I have felt God's deep affection for my soul. And because I've felt that, I feel it for other people. And I really, really care about other people. And after you've experienced that, like I can tell you right off the bat, if someone is a nasty person who uses spirituality, I talked to God, God just talked to me, who uses their spirituality for authority over other people, and they treat other people like garbage, mm-hmm. You have not experienced contemplative prayer.
Right. Yeah.
You're faking it. You're faking it because it changes you on such a deep visual level where you view the world around you so differently because God has allowed you a glimpse of how He views the world. And you've experienced God loving your soul in such a way that you cannot forget. That is how He loves that person over there. That is how He loves Cassidy. That is how He loves my children. And you grow in more and more, especially as a Christian, you grow more and more in appreciation for not only God, but also humankind. So you end up relating to people differently. You're a lot less offended by things. Because you've seen the inside, you've seen what's important. Have you ever heard of I believe it's Plato's analogy about the shadows?
It was about the shadows on the wall.
The shadows on the caves. So to sum it up for anyone who doesn't know it, and I believe it was Plato. I don't know. Like I said, people can correct me because I'm definitely not all-knowing. But basically, you have these three guys who are in a cave, and they're shown shadow puppets on the wall, and their whole life revolves around trying to guess what the shape is of that shadow. And then one of the guys is released, and he experiences the light and the sunshine and everything that the world has to offer. And then he goes back down to that level he had been before with those other people, and he tries to explain it to them. And they not only think he's crazy, but they can't understand how anything is more important than their game of trying to figure out what the shadows on the wall are. And it's a lot like that. Contemplative prayer is very similar to that, where you've experienced something so profound that if it doesn't change you, it likely was not divine. And then St. Teresa of Avila, in her works, I can't remember which one it is, but she goes into how to try to figure out whether a locution, a contemplative prayer, comes from you, the devil, or God. And that was extremely helpful to me when I started experiencing these crazy things, which is crazy for a teenager to experience. And I experienced locutions when I was younger than a teenager, because when I finally found the Carmelites, I was like, okay, this is where I fit. And I was 15 when I discovered the Carmelites. So I had a very weird life. And then when I found the Carmelites, things made sense. And I found this whole group of people who viewed God and viewed the church and viewed other people how I did, which was evident in how they had experienced the love of God, you know?
And like, I feel like I can definitely relate to that, because I had crazy mystical experiences all through, like, started when I was like 16. And I feel like that it's always been leading up to the work that I'm doing on the HippieCatholic and talking to you and doing this thing, because I feel like that the people I've been able to connect with, it's so much bigger than me, and it's so humbling. And I feel like that I just have this sense of like I'm on the precipice of where I'm supposed to be.
Yeah.
Like, it's this feeling of like I'm about to like embark on like this big voyage like across the sea, and it's like I don't view it as like an ending of like, oh, I'm leaving the dock. I'm not like viewing it like that. I'm looking at it like, okay, I'm about to like set off on something new. And that's beautiful for me because I hate endings. I absolutely despise endings always. Like I would cry when like a movie would end when I was a kid. Like I would just rewatch Land Before Time over and over and over again. You know, so I definitely can relate to that feeling, and I'm sure that many people watching this can relate to that feeling too. And I think that it's so fascinating how you're like how the Holy Spirit changes you and doesn't leave you where you are, and that's kind of how you know it's God. And I agree with that because I feel like that the Holy Spirit leads, like, and you just follow, like things will just open up and you'll just like be like, okay, I'll take the hint. Okay, I'll go through this. Like, and that's just kind of how it goes. And then you turn back and you're like, oh my gosh, I've grown. Like I'm different than how I started. And you don't even realize it because it's so subtle.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the beauty of it too. And then I guess going off of that, like how did you choose to become a Carmelite?
Well, I had experiences as a child. I was a deeply religious and deeply spiritual child. Despite the fact that my parents, they didn't really raise us Catholic, if you will. They both had conversion experiences, my mom when I was 14 and my dad when I was 16. So despite the fact that my family took us to church, we didn't have conversations about God all that often. And it wasn't until my later teen years that they kind of, or I guess my earlier teen years, that they kind of had their own spiritual awakening. So here I was as a child, and I was experiencing things that I had no one in my life to explain to me, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And like I said before, God really meets us where we're at.
Right.
So a lot of my education about spirituality came from him. And he would find a way to make to help a little girl understand things and help it make sense, even though I didn't really have religious instruction. You know what I mean? I had a very deep awareness of who God was. I had a very deep awareness of how he loved me and where he wanted to lead me. And I never didn't talk to God.
Right.
So it was weird for me. It was actually very traumatizing for me when I had the realization that other people didn't have this kind of life.
Mm-hmm.
When I realized that, even in Catholic circles, when I started taking theology classes, that people did not have this kind of relationship with God. I thought everybody did. I thought it was no big deal. And I know that sounds very, very naive, but thinking back, I'm like, I would fight with God. I felt like God's brat, where he would like ask me to do something and I would be like, nah, I don't want to do that. And then here these people exist who would kill to hear God, Yeah. And I really took advantage of that because I didn't know any better. And God was so patient with me. He really was. Looking back, I'm like, he is such a merciful, loving father because I was a brat. When I realized that this wasn't really a thing, I mean, even last year, I was talking to, I'm friends with quite a few priests. And last year I was talking to a priest friend of mine, and he expressed shock that I said to him, like, God told me to say this to you. And he was shocked, and he's like, I've never heard God. And I'm like,
wow,
you're a priest. I don't understand. So it's weird for me because like I can't, once again, this sounds really, really snobbish. And this is why I kind of opened up with the whole, like, I'm afraid to talk about my spirituality because I don't want people to think I'm trying to get authority. But I can't comprehend that life. I can't comprehend the idea of me not being able to go to God and have conversations with God and get an answer blows my mind. Like, if that was to be suddenly cut off from me, I would lose it. I would be like, I don't know what to do. Like, I'm lost. So that's another reason why I'm so passionate about teaching other people about this, because not only does God want every single person to have a close relationship with him, where they can maybe also be God's brats, but I love people so much that I want that for them so much, because I would feel absolutely lost if I didn't have that. I can't comprehend it because I've never lived that kind of life. Whereas you have these great saints who write about, you have St. Augustine, who's one of my people, and I bring him up in my videos all the time, who writes about like the discovery of God and his connection with God after he was pulled out of, that's so amazing and powerful. And I can't sympathize with it.
That's wild, because I kind of can sympathize with both, because there's been periods of my life where I have not been able to hear God, even though our language kind of really falls short of what it's like to experience communication with God or like communion with God. But so it's like I kind of understand like the Catholics who they're Catholic like purely because of logic, because actually that was what pulled me back to my adult Catholicism. My childhood Catholicism was very like mystical and stuff, even though like actually as a kid I didn't have that many experiences either like of God directly, but I just was so much in awe of like nature and just reality. And like my teachers and stuff would say when I was like a small child that I had like an abnormal amount of empathy for my age, like that was like strange in like my age group, I guess. So like so it's like I kind of had like a sense of like connectivity with reality and stuff. And then it wasn't until I was about like 16, that was kind of when I started to like get little like messages from God, or I would call them that, or like little like God winks and stuff. And honestly, something that's so cool about it is that I know people who have had similar phenomena who are not Catholics, and they put different language on it. Some people might even like use the language of like, oh, like I'm a medium, but like it's funny because it's like, it's so funny how language works, because something I've learned is that a lot of times people have different definitions for words. People have different definitions for, and sometimes we'll be talking about two totally different things. And like, there's been times I've debated people, and then they're like, they elaborate on their point a little more. I'm like, wait, what? That's what you're talking about? Yeah. And, and it's so beautiful because there's this misconception around Catholicism, like that Catholicism is not mystical, and that it's not contemplative, and that like, and that's just not true. And that's something that I've really wanted to share with people as well, like, is that, people need to know that the Catholic Church is alive, and the Spirit of God is moving through the church and moving through all of us. And like, it's not a stoic thing that's like, it doesn't end when a theology book closes. It's not like, oh, that just happened in the Bible. Like, that stuff happens now. It happens in our everyday lives, as little as our lives may be. So, like, yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, of course, Catholicism is like the scholar's religion. We've got the history, we've got the science. I would always tell people, I have the viewpoints that I do when it comes to science and ethics. I'm Catholic because of those held viewpoints, because Catholicism has always been ahead of its time, Right. And yeah, then you have those people who think that Catholicism is just superstition. And it's like they've never been exposed to the amazing scholarly aspect of Catholicism and the theology and the history. And it's just this never-ending treasure trove. But then you go and you open up the treasure chest of spirituality. And it's like, oh, what do we have here? It's never ending. I actually had a quote about contemplative prayer. And it has to do with like understanding how amazing it is. So let me read this. This is from ocarm.org. Contemplation begins with desire, not our desire for God, but his desire for us. The first and greatest commandment may be to love God with every fiber of our being, but there's something still more fundamental, the realization that we are loved first. Every contemplative makes this discovery, and in fact, bases his or her life on it, that our God is a pursuing God. The whole Carmelite tradition is clear. Our desire for God is first awakened by his desire for us. This is the message of our great saints and mystics. The Dark Night and the Spiritual Canticle of John of the Cross, Teresa of Avila's Interior Castle, together with every other spiritual classic, celebrate this divine pursuit, the lover and the beloved seeking each other in the light and darkness of love's turbulent ways. So that comes back to God awakening the desire in us, but our first need to be understanding that he desires us, which is why it's so fundamental to our humanity. That's why it's first and center of the Catechism, because understanding that God loves us is so fundamental to our very existence. And contemplative prayer has that first and foremost. So with contemplative prayer, it seems kind of counter to like the scholarliness of Catholicism, right?
Right.
And then here I come along and I'm like, no, they're good together. Well, three out of the 4 female doctors of the church are contemplatives. They're Carmelite contemplatives. Even though the charism is more or less loving God. Like that's what it is. The charism is contemplative prayer. It's love. Right. Not to say that all the other orders fall short of that or anything, but the Carmelite charism is focus on that prayer. So like the three major things every secular Carmelite is supposed to do is, firstly, you take half an hour a day to devote that to God, to try to enter into that interior castle. And then you go to Mass, and then say the morning and evening office and the night office if you can. So liturgy of the hours, which is awesome because it's also the Psalms that Jesus was praying, you know? So you have that unity in the church. And of course, all priests are supposed to say the liturgy of the hours every day. So you have that, not only that unity with God on the daily, but that unity within his church, within each other, which is so extremely powerful because it's all over the world, you know, and it's so universal. And it's just, God's hands are everywhere and calling us all together to be unified with each other with him.
Yes, absolutely. That's beautiful. And like, I think that like we definitely need like the universal message today, and like that's why I love this book by Father Richard Rohr. He's a Franciscan, but like he wrote a book called The Universal Christ. That's absolutely amazing. I'll put that in the description box below. I love the Franciscans. My favorite orders are like the Jesuits, the Franciscans, and the Carmelites are my favorites. What are some stories you've heard about listening to God?
And when it comes to listening to God, the best I can speak is to my own experiences where like I had referenced, I felt like God's brat, you know?
Yeah.
But after you get used to hearing God's voice, and pro tip, God doesn't usually say things to you that you want to hear. That's one of the cheat tips for figuring out whether or not someone else is authentic, because it's like, oh, that person over there talks about how God talks to them nonstop. And it's funny that God only says to them things that make them grow in human esteem, you know?
Right. Yeah.
Whereas like God would ask me to do things. If there's anyone in the Bible that I identify with the most, it's Jonah. Because I'm one of those people, I'm like, listen. Because it's like I have followed through with doing things God has asked me to do, and I've gotten in trouble.
Yeah.
So there's happy things. Like this one time, I used to work at Cold Stone Creamery, and I've always had this big devotion to Divine Mercy Chaplet right at 3:00. And I took my breaks right at 3:00. My Alexa woke up for a second there. Go back to sleep. Don't listen to this. Okay. So I took my breaks right at 3:00, and sometimes I would go sit on the corner of Starbucks because I worked with lots of anti-Catholics who didn't treat me very well. So a lot of times I'd leave the premises and go sit outside the Starbucks, or I'd walk around the back and go sit by the dumpsters to go little 16-year-old me. And this one time it was raining. And it was cold. It was like November. And it was rainy. Not pouring down rain, but it was wet. It was uncomfortable. And I felt a locution where God was like, go outside. And these are things that's hard to talk about. Go outside and take your rosary and pray Divine Mercy Chaplet on the corner outside the Starbucks. And I fought it. And I kept telling myself, oh, that wasn't God. It's all in my head. Because I'm like, it's cold. I don't have a jacket. I don't want to. So it definitely wasn't God. And then the feelings became stronger and stronger. And so I was like, fine. I don't understand it. Maybe he wants me to catch cold so I get some time off work. Okay. So I went and I sat there and I prayed Divine Mercy Chaplet and I came in. Nothing miraculous happened. Okay, God, there you go. Happy. And 2 days later, one of the regulars who would come in at least once a week with her son. She was a young adult, had a little boy. And she knew me pretty well. And she looked at me and she said, I saw you a couple days ago praying a rosary in the rain. Sorry. And I started going back to church. So that's one of the times I experienced something, and it doesn't make sense a lot of the time.
Yeah.
Before I got married, my husband and I are very scientifically aware people, and we knew that my ovulation was beginning on our wedding night. And here we were, goody two-shoes, So I was like, listen, we can wait a few days. And my husband's like, no. We have to at least consummate, and then we'll wait a few days. And then, so I was overwhelmingly aware of, I would get pregnant, very likely to get pregnant.
Right.
And this is one of the stories I'm actually open about. I only have 2 stories about my spirituality I posted on Facebook. But, so the Monday before my Friday wedding, I was just in tears. I was torn up. A few Catholics I had asked had told me to use contraceptive. Just use a condom. It's fine. And I was like, I'm not going to enter into my marriage with an act that, like, the first act being defiance against God. My husband, who was not Catholic, proposed to me in adoration, like, this was so important to me. And it was one of those things where it's like, if I've had this relationship with God, with the church, if it's led me this far, and there was one priest I was going to call to ask his opinion. And I thought about it, and I knew he was going to say to me, well, have you prayed about it? And I had realized that I had avoided praying about it because I knew I'd get an answer. And I knew I didn't want the answer. And I was so busy looking for ways around the Catholic doctrine that I fought for and that I upheld, that I hadn't prayed about it. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to pray about it. And I asked God, what should I do? And it was just a simple, you followed the church this far. Why would you not listen when it comes to this? And I was like, okay. All right. And I was devastated. I was devastated because I was terrified. I was 22. And I don't suppose your audience knows this, but I had 4 children in less than 4 years of marriage. No multiples. So I was jumping into this phase of life where it wasn't even having that kind of union with God. It caused turbulence, It's not all roses. But I knew that I had to do what God wanted me to do. And I was created. My vocation with my life is to spread the message of the truth of Catholicism. So I have to abandon myself. I have to abandon myself to God's will. And that's what we did. And it was hard. But people think that, they'll achieve contemplative prayer. They'll achieve ongoing communication with God. And look at the prophets, Look at the saints. Their lives were not rosy. But the fact is that this is not our home. We are called for heaven. And contemplative prayer is a taste of that. Just a nibble.
Yeah. Did you end up getting pregnant?
I got pregnant on my wedding night.
Wow. Maybe it was meant to happen, that your child was meant to come. That was the time. Yeah. It's funny. When I was my parents have like a conception story with me that I exist because of Titanic, which is funny. But
I exist because I'm an Oreo cookie.
I love that. Like, you know what? It's like sometimes I feel like the God is like calling us to be like, okay, you're ready. You might not feel like you're ready, but you're ready. Yeah. And it might be something like mundane, like maybe one day you'll be like, oh yeah, I want to go like for a run down this path, like I always do, and I love it. And then God's like, nope, don't go down there that day. And then like you find out something happened on like that path that day that you were supposed to run, you know? And it's like, I feel like that just trusting your conscience and trusting like that God speaks there and speaks to us where we are, I think it's so essential to our growth as people. And actually, something I heard from somebody who actually was an ex-cult member was that you know that your God does not exist if your God believes everything that you do.
Yeah, there's the Chesterton quote, I don't need a church to tell me I'm right. I need a church to tell me I'm wrong when I think I'm right.
Exactly. And it's like, it's so important because it's like, I feel like it always has, the pursuit of the truth has to always start with God. And you don't come to a church, or you don't come to the Catholic Church being like, oh, what aligns with my, you know, preconceived values. It's like, how do your values, how do they like connect with the church? You know, how does it flow that way, you know? And I think that for me, I always have to like remember that like Christ is the embodiment of truth, like truth in the most like abstract like sense of truth. That's Christ. And that's always been hard for me because always when I was like young and stuff, I was like, I would tell like tall tales all the time because like I'm aspiring to be a fiction writer. I just had a very big imagination, and like I was not very happy with my childhood. I had some like traumatic experiences in my childhood, and I just wanted to like escape. So I would like tell lies for myself, and I would tell them for other people so that they would think my life was better than it was. And when I got into like more communion with God, I realized that like God would take me to better places. I wouldn't have to be telling lies about how I wish my life would be better. God would actually lead me to a new reality where like life actually would be better. I wouldn't always just be waiting for life to be better. And I was terrified of honesty, and I was terrified of, you know, I was terrified of it because I'm like, honesty is the trauma, is that harsh reality I was living in. I don't want that.
Yeah.
And
you're looking to escape.
Yeah, I was looking to escape. And in many ways, I feel like that my life has always been me running away from things that, in truth, yes, they were reality, but they weren't the only reality. And that's something that I've had to learn. And I've had to learn that truth is my God. That truth is my, you know, God is God, and God loves me. And the truth is, even though I'm terrified of it, it's also my God, and it loves me. Like, God loves me, you know, so, and loves all of us. And I think that that's, like, thank you for sharing your stories. Like, those were beautiful. How do you think that the Secular Carmelite Order is empowering to Catholics? Because I know that the church, like you said, even like St. Teresa of Avila's time, it's always had corruption, it's always had drama, it's always had craziness, you know. And I think that an issue we have in the church today, we definitely have a lot of clericalism. And I think that the antidote to clericalism is mysticism, and is an empowered laity. And people who are, you know, in laity who care about their faith, who have, like, and can lead in their faith in that way. So, like, how do you feel like that the Secular Carmelite Order has empowered you?
Well, like you said, there's going to be corruption in really any organization, no matter how small. In groups of friends, there's corruption. And you definitely encounter, you know, even power struggles within Carmelite communities. So I've experienced a wonderful Carmelite community, and I've experienced one where I wasn't treated well, which was ironic because I was the youngest by about 85 years. We definitely need to focus on how secular Carmelite spirituality strengthens the church generally. And it strengthens the church because it strengthens individuals. And the first line of defense for the church right now, especially with how much, clerical abuse is going on, there's the story that broke today with the priest, with the dominatrix on the altar. Yeah,
I saw that.
I'm really, really not happy with the state of church leadership. And the reality is that the peasants in the field with their pitchforks need to rise up. And that's us. To be the laity taking back the church. And it all begins with our own focus on our spiritual union with God. Because it's one thing to want to fight for the church because it's right and it's just. It's another thing to fight for something because you love it so much. It's another thing to fight for something because you would lay down your life to preserve how wonderful and beautiful it is for your children.
Right.
And any kind of spirituality of any order, the Franciscans, the Jesuits, any kind of spirituality will strengthen you, which will then strengthen the laity. That's what we need right now. We need an educated laity. We need a spiritual laity. We need both the brain and the heart. And unfortunately, too many Catholics don't have either. Let's be real.
Yes, that's
so that's why you've got two young females who are making videos about this kind of stuff because our male priests aren't stepping up. And it's awful that there are so many good priests who are then silenced. And I'm really, really mad about it. And I think that the laity needs to do its part to take back our church. And it has to do it with education and love and being super pissed.
I feel like that women in the church need to feel like that they have a place in the church, and that we have strengths and we have gifts that we can offer the church. And as Edith Stein says, the feminine genius, women have so many things that we can offer. And I feel like that there's such a wounded feminine energy in the world.
Well, that exists because people downplay the importance of motherhood.
Exactly. Yes.
The reality is that a woman in the church, women are the most powerful weapon in the church because women raise priests.
Right.
That's what we need. We need educated spiritual women to give their lives to the church by raising the church. A renewed church is going to be on the backs of our generation's women giving birth to the next generation's priests. And that is where so much feminine genius comes from. That's where it's so important to educate your children. It's so important to love your children. And you love your children in a way that encourages them to find the love of God. Because I've experienced the love of God in a profound way. And as of right now, my children are experiencing the love of God in how I treat them.
Right.
And how I treat them is going to set the stage for whether or not they are going to feel comfortable approaching God.
Right.
Okay, I understand that my parents love me. I understand that they treat me this way. I understand that they are merciful and they will accept me no matter what I do. Okay, so now my mission is to teach my children spirituality that I have achieved and make the church better.
I think that's something that the church needs to do to help women and to help, strengthen the church ultimately, is to find places and empower women, who are not called to motherhood. Mm-hmm. And I think that we always need to be empowering mothers, but I also feel like that there's a disconnect between, like, I'm single. I've been single for about 3.5 years. I feel called to the church, and I feel called to have a voice to the church. I mean, I'm doing a YouTube channel, and it's like, I don't have a man. I don't have anybody, and it's like, I feel like that we need spaces for women like me, because I do not feel called to, like, be a sister or a nun. And I want to be a mother one day, but, like, I don't feel like, even though I feel like that motherhood, if I'm blessed with that, would be the most beautiful thing, I want to know that, like, I am Imago Dei and I have gifts, to give the church, even without a child. Even though a child would be the biggest blessing in the world, I also am like, okay, I feel like that a lot of women, there's this, like, disconnect of, like, oh, you be a mother or you be a nun, and it's like, what about the laity in the middle that are like, well, I don't feel called to be a mother, but I don't feel called to be a nun either, like, where do I fall? And that's what, like, I feel like that the secular Carmelites and, like, other, like, secular religious orders are, like, such a great, there's such great opportunities for those people that are in the middle, that are like, okay, I don't know if I want to be a sister, but I don't know if I want to be a mother either, but I want to, be a part of this church. And I'm pursuing an education in religious studies. I might be a theologian one day, who knows? But, I think empowering women in those ways and in academic ways, and, like, having our voices be highlighted in the church, I feel like that will definitely strengthen the church in one of many ways. There's many, I mean, we could talk for hours about all the ways that we could strengthen the church. Yeah. But those are kind of, like, my thoughts on it. And definitely we need more respect for mothers. Yeah. The way mothers are treated by society is absolutely abhorrent. And I wish that it wasn't like that.
I want to reflect on something that you said. Too many times people look at their worth in a twisted backwards way, whereas I'm only worth what I can produce for the world. Ooh, and if I can't produce a child, if I can't be a mother, I'm no good. And women face that in the church in a big way. And even if it's like, oh, I can only produce 1 kid, I can only produce 2 kids. I have such a huge issue with that, because it's almost like demonic, where it's like, no, you are not your potential. You are a child of God. You are loved. Everything, your worth comes right back to how much God loves and desires you. So even if someone feels lost without a role, their role is to be loved by God. And the best thing they're going to be able to do for the church is be loved by God and love others, no matter what their role is. And in fact, I mean, if you don't have love, it's pointless. As St. Paul pointed out, it's meaningless. So what I would like to see happen in our culture is stop defining people by their potential, what they're capable of. Oh, the wasted potential. They're human beings worthy of dignity. I'm a mother. You're not a mother. You are still doing what you can to feel the love of God and share the love of God. And that is powerful. Even if you're not called to marriage right now or to be a sister, you are still living out the vocation that is in all of us, ingrained in all of us at our conception, to find the love of God. Because God does not call us to be comfortable.
No.
He calls us to be holy. Just like marriage shouldn't make you happy, it should make you holy.
people in a marriage should be building each other up and making each other better people. It's a partnership. It's a partnership in life, and it's about making yourself a better person for God, and and helping the other person. Like iron sharpens iron, right? I think that's in Proverbs, I believe.
Yeah.
I think that the laity just need to feel inspired and need to feel like that they're worth something. And I think that what you said is very compelling about, we are like so much more than what we produce. We are so much more, you're worth so much more than like being like, I'm a girl boss, like, even though I think that being a girl boss is great, like, that it's like, yeah, you might be a girl boss if you're like an entrepreneur and stuff, but that's not the core of what you are. You're a child of God, and like, you need to always hold that in your center, and because there's so much pressure on everybody that like, okay, you are what you produce. It kills the soul. It's so upsetting.
Because you'll never be enough.
Right, you'll never be enough.
You'll never be enough, and the reality is the world tells you you're not enough. But when you sit down to pray, when you enter into that chapel with the tabernacle, the world is right there. Heaven is right there. You go into that little, the little chapel with the tabernacle, and the whole world is inside. And the outside world is telling you, you will never be enough. You will never be smart enough, pretty enough, rich enough. And God is like, no, you were enough at your conception. I loved you. And the reality is that if we authentically feel the love of God, everything else is kind of fluff. And I don't want to say like, having great marriages isn't important or anything. I don't mean it like that. It's kind of like you have everything, and everything else is kind of added on to everything.
Exactly.
And the more God calls of you, the more difficult your life will likely be. And we've seen that through the Bible and history of the saints and everything. Because God does not call us to comfort. He calls us to virtue.
Right.
So it's almost like contemplative prayer is kind of, a reward of a taste in heaven in a way, where it's like, this is what I'm calling you towards. I know right now life is hard, but come to me. I will give you a taste of what your eternity will be like if you just let me love you.
That being said, how does one become a secular Carmelite?
There's different communities set up. And a lot of times you can just look online where your nearest community is. They usually meet about once a month. You can usually, email whoever the contact is and say, I'm interested in having a sit-in. When can I come? When is it appropriate? With my first Carmelite order, or my first Carmelite community, they just let newcomers come and hang out. And it was so big and it was so thriving. Of course, I was the youngest by at least, 12 years because I was a baby. But it was still so thriving, they ended up having to cut it up into smaller communities so people got to know each other. But for that community, you could show up and be like, I'm a newcomer. I just want to see what's up. And they would set you up in a class and answer your questions. And then you could go sit in with the rest of the community for the community meeting. And you could discuss theology and whatever books you were reading at the time. And it was awesome. It was like, my brother said it the best when he sat in for a Carmelite meeting and he went home and told my other siblings, I found where the mothership lands. Because they're all like Mom and Regina. I love that. And then there's one time I had a bad experience, and actually one of my priests, who was a Carmelite, wrote to the organizer of that community where I showed up for a Carmelite meeting. And here I was, I was brand new, but I had already made first promise. And I walked in and I was not treated very nicely. And they shooed me out. And I'm like, I'm a Carmelite for real. I have my papers I can show you. And it just was very, very cold. Yeah. And that community was dying. And like I said, I was the youngest by about 85 years. And unfortunately, there are some corrupt, communities where it's like people are like, well, this is our club.
Right.
No. Because at that point, you're messing with giving other people the opportunity to experience the love of God on a profound level and make the church better. Like you're wanting to have your club is getting in the way of God's divine master plan. So get over yourself,
And there's something that's so powerful about holy orders, because like when you become a part of a holy order, you represent the church, and there is some form of power and like, authority that's given to you that is precious. And like to deny people that opportunity just seems very selfish.
Mm-hmm. It is. It's selfish, because the most important thing in the world is getting yourself to heaven and getting other people to heaven. And if you become a stumbling block to that, you're going to get hell or purgatory extra time in purgatory for you, because God really, really wants every single person. So this is where the whole, people use their spirituality to seem holier than thou art. Mm-hmm. And I have a really big problem with that, which is why I keep bringing it up. Because the reality is that we are all called to this union with God. And people act like, no, this union of God, it's mine. I'm special. God talks to me. I'm special. Like, I've got zero chill for that.
Right. It comes from a scarcity mindset. In that it's kind of a result of that you are what you produce. Mm-hmm. It comes from that people, it's this feeling of that they're never enough and that there's not enough, when in truth there is enough love for everybody. And actually there's enough resources on this planet for everybody. Our planet is big enough for us. Mm-hmm. We are a part of this creation. We are not separate from it. Yeah. And it's so sad, because I feel like that's the core of like so much sin in the world, is that people don't feel like there's enough love. Like that if somebody gets love, then they're getting less.
It's pride. Everything always comes back down to pride, where people want to feel like God's special little dumpling. They're special from everyone else. And it's like, no. And that's kind of one of the red flags, where you notice that it's like, okay, you do not have an authentic relationship with the creator of mankind if you're trying to use him to have authority and bully other people. And you also aren't given a deep-seated desire to share him with others, because you've experienced that.
Right.
So yeah, I don't want to be like, it's so hard to find a good community, but, try it out, because like I said, it's going to be the laity that changes the church. So I want to encourage, viewers, look up your local communities, contact them first, show up, see what it's about. It might be awesome or it might be lame, but just as, you show up to a mass, you're showing up for Jesus Christ, not the other people who are there.
And then also I kind of wanted to ask you about, because I am wearing my scapular, and I've been wearing my scapular since I did it as a thing for Lent, this past Lent, because I'm like, instead of taking something away, I'm going to add a spiritual practice to my life. Good. And it's going to be one that's going to challenge me, because I kind of like you, even though oddly enough, it's a very Catholic area. Like, I feel like that the laity we didn't want to be too Catholic. Like, we didn't want to look Catholic. We didn't want to look like, so I would still get side eye when I would like have a prayer card on me or something. Like, people would they wanted you to be discreet about it. Like, they're like, okay, like, you can have your God, but you need to be discreet about it. And I feel like that there was I think that's a very American experience, because, the Protestant crosses, the evangelical, worship stuff, that was allowed to be out in the open, but Catholicism had to be, under your shirt. I have anxiety like you do, and I'm just kind of like, I don't know if I have the strength to have people give me those looks, you know? So I was like, this Lent, I'm like, you know what? I'm going to have the strength to have people give me those looks and see what happens. And so I've been wearing this since like February, and it's been amazing. And it's funny because I live in like a very urban area. Like I live in Chicago, and it's like, and people always like give Chicago like a bad rep because they're like, oh, there's all those progressives there, like oh, like God there, you know. And then it's like, I'll go in like a cafe or something, I'll be getting coffee, and the barista would be like, oh my gosh, I love your necklace. And it's like the skin, and I look down and my scapular is showing, and she's like, oh my gosh, that's the coolest thing. And like, I realized, I'm like, okay, and I would have conversations with people. It'd be like a conversation starter. But then people would be like, because they would just be drawn in by the artwork of just like, like, oh,
by the beauty of it.
Beauty of it, of just like, just people get called in. And I know that the scapular is like a big part of Carmelite spirituality. So like, what are your thoughts on the scapular? And, you know.
Well, when you take your first promise in, I guess I hadn't talked about that. When you take your first promise in the Carmelite community, you are given a big scapular, right?
Oh, wow.
And this is taken from, you know, what they make Carmelite habits out of. And I actually, when I was 16, 16, I actually made myself a full Carmelite habit.
Wow. I love that.
So I'll find some of those pictures and I'll send them to you, and maybe you could post them. But so this is the scapular that we're given, right? And you're supposed to always wear a scapular. Now, I'm not saying that this jives, you know, that this is so against my style. But, you know, I'll use my kids as an excuse. I don't want to get it dirty, and it's really big, and it falls out, and I don't want to lose it. So another acceptable thing you can do is wear a smaller one, as you're doing, so you don't have to have the big, or you can wear a miraculous medal. So I can't tell you how many miraculous medals I've lost.
I've lost mine.
It's like demonic. I would set my miraculous medal down, and then I go and I look, it's like, devil must have taken it, and I don't know where it is. So this is my newest one. So I always wear a miraculous medal.
That's beautiful.
It's miraculous medal ring. So I guess I'll just leave it on. So that's one of the things that you're supposed to do when you take first promise. So it's the outside sign of the inward conviction, right? Well, like with confirmation. And then you take vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. Now, the vows of poverty are probably the most extreme different.
Yeah.
Now, a secular vow of poverty is different from a religious vow of poverty. So with me, I have a very nice house, right? And we bought a foreclosed on mansion, and we live in the countryside.
Gold.
Our floors are inlaid with gold. But we bought it for a third of the price, and we're working on it. And one of our goals is to sell it to get a profit in order to start a community to help foster and orphan children. So, like, there's a method to the madness. But I live in a mansion. We're not rich, but we definitely knew what it was like to struggle, especially having 4 children in less than 4 years. As soon as we were married, you know, we were young 20s. So we know what it's like to struggle financially. And it really has only been the last 4 years that my husband and I have been very financially comfortable, which means that we know what other people are going through when they struggle financially.
Right.
And we know how to get by on less. So having a spirit of poverty is having that kind of awareness of, what do I have that I can give to others to aid them in their corporal and spiritual life? I'll go ahead and give that. What do I have? I'm a big believer in Catholics putting their money where their mouth is and helping priests who are under fire. You know, we've helped pay for a couple different priests, canon lawyers, because they were under fire, you know?
Yeah.
I'm a big believer in that. So having the poverty of spirit, not being attached to your stuff. Like, right. I have nice things. I invest in nice things. I take care of my stuff because I know what it's like to be poor. So I have a greater appreciation for what I have now and the things that I have. But if my house were to burn down, I would not be howling, you know, because it's stuff. As long as my kids got out, that's all that matters to me. And to give you an example, a very specific example, I have a Louis Vuitton purse. Mm-hmm. I did not buy it. I won it in a contest. I worked to win it in this contest in order to sell it, to give the money to a priest for something he was going through.
Wow.
His parish. And so I still actually have this purse because when we figured out what it was actually worth, we would not have been able to get the resale value, and between paying taxes, it wasn't that much. So we just went ahead and gave that priest the cash but we would have gotten for it. So then my husband's CEO doesn't get mad at us for no longer having this purse that we worked really hard to win. So I still have it. I don't use it. I'm like, that is like, and I'm not saying other Catholic women can't use Louis Vuitton purses or anything like that, but I am a secular Carmelite. It is ridiculous for me to have a Louis Vuitton purse. So that's kind of like what draws the line. There's like, you shouldn't be attached to material things, but also have an awareness when something is a little bit over the top. You know what I mean?
Exactly. And I think that also, like, something that I've been called to do, and I think that's something that a lot of people in my age group, I'm kind of like the younger end of the millennials, but the older end of Gen Z. I'm like in that weird purgatory of a generation. Like, some of my like greatest treasures I've found have been things I found on the curb that were going to be thrown out. Like, I have this like green chair that's actually in my videos. Like, it's actually in like my birth control story video, like if you guys want to look at it. But I rescued that chair from the garbage, and it is my favorite thing. Like, I love that chair, and I love it like more than like, yeah, I have like some name brand stuff that like I appreciate that people bought that stuff for me, and I appreciate the gesture and the love behind that. But like, I love my green chair that was on the curb. Like,
yeah.
And that's the one that I like to go to. And it's like, I like to go to thrift stores, and I like to go to things that have been used and have stories to them. But then maybe that's why I love it, you know? And actually by some ways that like fight against climate change and stuff are by either being a minimalist, and that means like not like consuming a bunch of unnecessary things. That's kind of hard for me because I don't really like white walls. I like, you know, I like to put like stuff up. I like to decorate. But the other thing that people can do is that they can thrift and reuse things and refurbish things, and, you know, keep reusing old things and remaking them. And like, that's a way that people can protect the environment and protect, you know, our virtue too, of like, it's cool how it all connects, like with the vow of poverty and like equal justice. It's all connected. Like, God's amazing. I guess going off of that, like, how do you integrate your spirituality into your secular lifestyle?
You also take a vow of chastity along with the poverty and obedience. So obedience is simply, it's like, you know, the easiest. You have obedience to the community, to the archbishop, to the pope, you know, basic stuff. But then you have the vow of chastity, which is obviously going to be different for third orders versus, you know, religious, because third orders are lay, and, you know, obviously I'm married. So the thing is with the vow of chastity, it's basically the same things that are expected from Catholics generally, you know, where it's like, you know, you will respect the natural law, you will respect your spouse, you'll avoid, you know, pornographic material. So you take these vows, these promises, where they're technically they're promises, there's, you know, differences, but it's more or less the same things that's expected of Catholics generally when they make their marital vows, you know?
Right. Of like being faithful to your spouse and yeah, and just like honoring God with your sexuality and stuff. That's very good to know, and it's important to know, I guess, like how the secular Carmelites kind of like overlapped with like the lay experience, and then also like, but it's a holy order, so it's like the middle way. That's so cool. Finally, how do you make your life a prayer?
What got me through my days a lot were mantras. I'm very big into mantras. Mm-hmm. Mantras can be anything from, you know, Bible verses to saint quotes, but just recentering you. The best way to make your life a prayer is to remind yourself and act according to the mindset that everything you're doing is for the greater good of God and the church. So just living out your life, especially, you know, as a mom, I'm busy with a ton of kids. I'm trying to meet deadlines. It can be very, very overwhelming to be a secular Carmelite because there's plenty of days that I don't get to the liturgy of the hours. There's plenty of time that, you know, I'll get the kids and another part of the house to be like, okay, I'm going to sit down for contemplative prayer, and the dog across the street won't shut up. It's a lot about having mercy on yourself. And what's nice is the secular Carmelites, you know, they have mercy on each other as well, where it's understandable if you don't do everything, you know, all the time, if you're not perfect, because life is very messy. But, you know, for any Catholic, making your life a prayer is simply reminding yourself who you are and why you're doing what you're doing. And it's so easy to make anything a prayer: laundry, washing the dishes, teaching your children to wash their hands, you know? And when you lose sight of the importance of even the small menial tasks, I don't want to be like, your life becomes meaningless, but you lose sight of the meaning of your life, right? You know? So not to be a downer, but if you don't work on making your everyday life a prayer, life gets much harder.
Kind of touching on what we were talking about with like that we are what we produce, you know, or like that idea of that we are what we produce. We're always in the pursuit of what's special, of like that something like a meteorite is going to come out of the sky and it's going to be like special, you know, and we're going to be like, oh, finally, I can finally be happy. Now there's like this special moment. I can be happy. And that's so sad because existence itself is a miracle. Existence itself is special. And honestly, the ordinary is more holy than the special.
I think to touch on that, I mean, Chesterton has a quote where the most extraordinary thing in the world is an ordinary man, an ordinary woman, and their ordinary children, you know?
Yes.
And it all comes back down to appreciating the most basic things about life. The most basic thing is what we were created for, which is to love God and be loved by Him, you know? So it all is like full circle, where truly the fulfillment of happiness is knowing you're loved by God and desired by God. And no one is going to be able to just find happiness. They have to decide to be happy no matter what, you know?
Yes.
Something can't really make someone happy. If someone's waiting for something to make them happy, they will never be happy because they'll never be satisfied. People have to decide on their own to be happy. And then they made that life choice, and it's a lot easier to be happy, you know?
Right.
Because the reality is that life is hard. You know, I have very different crosses than other people are going to have. And if we all dwell nonstop on our crosses instead of dwelling on what God created us for, which is to know him and love him, then we're going to be miserable. We will always find something to be miserable about.
Yes.
So that's why I encourage people to understand and study and participate in contemplative prayer.
I also know the importance of humility, and I know that you do too, and like how humility really, really heightens the human experience and lets us be loved.
Understanding, like you've already touched on, understanding how God humbled himself. He became a baby, which is the most vulnerable thing you can become, right?
Right.
And he not only became a baby, but now he becomes bread and wine. Well, he becomes himself in the form of bread and wine, which anyone can desecrate. And he allows that, much like when he allowed himself to be crucified. He allowed himself to be treated that way by his creations. And that humility is mind-blowing. It changes everything. When you truly understand the humility of God, it changes your outlook on everything in life. And that's the other thing to kind of warn people about when they draw closer to God, when they enter deeper and deeper into their interior castle and get closer to that throne room. You may experience a very deep sense of shame. Because the reality is that when the divine touches you, you become so overwhelmingly aware of your humanity and how imperfect you are and how unworthy you are. And you feel the depths of that unworthiness in a way you never thought you could. And so when people start experiencing that interaction with God, they start desiring on a very deep level to grow in virtue, to make themselves a better vessel for God. That's how you can see someone's true intention to grow in their spiritual life. Because I guess with me, I don't talk about my spiritual experiences because God knows what they are, and that's enough. And they're carrying me on to various decisions that I make to try to help make the church a better place. And I don't necessarily need to be shouting from the rooftops things that I've gone through. Because there's also a very deep sense of unworthiness. And so, not to knock Neo-Protestants or Pentecostals or anything like that, because I don't believe in knocking other people. But I've attended quite a few Protestant services where, people stand up and they're just like, God just told me to say this, and God told me to say, and I'm like, when God speaks to you, you are knocked out of your boots. Like, it is so profound. You are not flippant about it. You are shaking. I've had locutions and people have looked at me and I've been ghost white and I'm shaking. And it's like you have a physical reaction when God touches you because it's so counterintuitive, It's like what we were made for, but it's still so bizarre. So when the divine touches, it's like when the divine touches humanity, it changes you. You have a physical reaction. And your first reaction is always going to be, no matter how many times it happens, your first reaction is always going to be like,
right. And you're just like, did that just happen? What was that?
And with me, I'm very analytical. So I sit and I question it. And it happened with my husband, my now husband. Before we were married, I did not know about whether or not I should marry him. We were not in a relationship yet, and he was not Catholic, and I was very hesitant to be in a relationship with a non-Catholic since, here I'm Carmelite spirituality, and then here, of course I'm going to be called to marry a non-Catholic. And so I was very resistant to being in a relationship with him. And God revealed something to me back when I was 16 that my husband would say, that my future husband would say to me, because I asked God for a sign. And I was like, because I had just gotten out of my first abusive relationship. And so I asked God, I'm like, I need a sign to know if I'm supposed to marry someone, you know? And then here, of course, this guy I was resisting getting into a relationship with says this phrase God told me my future husband would say. And of course, no other man in my life says it. And he says this phrase, and I'm sitting there and I'm like, no, God, no, listen, God, no, listen. Because this is a huge cross I didn't want. For a Catholic to be married to a non-Catholic is a huge cross. People will downplay it, but it hurts. And that's another video I'll make. But here, he carried on speaking. I'm in this moment like, no, God, listen. Maybe that was in my head. Maybe I was wrong about everything. I need another sign. And then my husband says it again. And it didn't even make sense in the sentence structure that he was speaking. He says it again. And I was like, but it's like having moments like that, you know?
Right.
Where it's like you're interacting with the divine and it changes you. You have a physical reaction.
This sounds weird, but like I forget that they happen sometimes. And then I'm like, oh yeah, there was that time where like that dream happened, and like, you know, like I will like forget about them in my like everyday life. Like I don't go and I don't like yell about them or like say like I'm better than you because I had this happen. Like I'll share those stories because, and the reason why I share my stories when I do decide to share them is so that I could make people not feel alone, and that people feel validated. They don't feel like they're crazy, and they don't feel like that, so that they can know like something is going on, something greater than me is going on. But I definitely agree. There is like, it's unlike anything that we can experience. Even though we experience it, it's like, it's unlike everything else.
It gets to the point where you fear it's so unbelievable and you'll never be believed. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And that's why, you know, like I told you, I was having nightmares and lying awake with anxiety about doing this because I was so afraid of being open, you know? Because I know, you know, I have haters who watch everything I do and they're just waiting to pounce. And it's really hard to be vulnerable. And spirituality is so intimate. It's like talking about your sex life, you know? Level of vulnerability with God and with other people. And unfortunately, people will reject you, but it comes right back to understanding the love of God and understanding like God's like, I'm not going to reject you.
Yeah.
But also don't use me for props.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Would you want to close with a prayer? I just felt like I needed to do that. So like, and I don't know, I'm just going to make it up, I guess. Just God, in the name of Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, amen. Dear God, thank you so much for having Regina here, on this beautiful platform, the HippieCatholic, that you have given to me and to all of us who watch this video. Thank you so much for revealing yourself to us in humility and in your truth, and please keep calling us to yourself. No matter where we're at, no matter what we believe, just call us to yourself and let us hear you, and let us be close to you, and let us be open to your love, no matter what. Amen. In the name of Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, amen. Thank you so much, Regina, for chatting with us and telling us all about the Secular Carmelites. I will link Regina's channel, Veritas on the Rocks, and Faith and Reason Studios in the description box below, so you guys can check that out. Anyway, if you want to see more interviews or anything, or any more content you'd like to see, or questions you have for Regina or I, please leave them in the comment section below. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much, guys, for watching. I'm Cassidy. I'm the Hippie Catholic. God bless.
Thank you. This is awesome. Bye, everybody.